Daniel, if you are talking, nobody is hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, so I restart. Yeah, I was explaining to you how you get into the conversation. So if you did not expect to be in the DRIP working group, then you were in the wrong session. And let's start. So I hope it's not the first time you see the Notewell, but if it is, please take the time to read it. And if you have any questions, please check that with Med, myself, or Eric, our area director. Logistic. So see what happens when you don't do it. So when you want to talk, just press the right icon, which is the microphone. And if you want us to see you, you can share the camera. I don't expect you to share the screen, but we have a specific icon for that. And there are also other tools if we would like to hum, or if you want to chat, you can use that as well as the regular Jabber client. Do we have a Jabber scribe? I think Bob is doing that. Well, I can see Michael saying I was explaining how to unmute, but Bob, are you the Jabber scribe? Do we have a Jabber scribe then? Oh, okay, Bob can do that. Minute taker.
Stewart is taking the minutes.
Okay, thank you, Stewart. So the agenda today. We will. Okay, the milestones. So today we're going to be focused on the architecture. And then in a solution implementation, we will have a few presentations, implementations, demo, and new topics like attestation, claims, assertion, and as well as privacy. I mean, the privacy has been on the agenda for a while. Now it's going to be presented, hopefully. And then we will close the session. Milestones. So we have the first document being shipped to our area director. So thank you, Stu, for the great work you did, because it was not an easy one, but you managed that. And now the working group has two work to accomplish. We hope that the architecture document is going to be by the end of the year, and why not the other document? Okay, any comment, any agenda bashing, anything someone would like to raise? Maybe I can talk about I can talk about a liaison statement we just received. Or maybe Med, you want to say a few words on that? So we received a liaison statement from ITU. I'm printing that on the screen. So that came a few hours ago. So it's, do you want to say something on it, Med, or?
Nothing specific to add for the moment. Yeah, so that we are, as you mentioned, we have just received the liaison statement. We also received a note from Jim Reid to have more background, I would say, on the work of this working group. So yeah, so the intent will be to discuss how we can deal with this. I would say if we want to to reply to this illness or not. But this is something I will discuss with the area director and also with the working group. So this is to be done.
Yeah. So the working group, you have the link here. I can put it on the. Well, I mean, it has been sent on the mailing list, and the documents are here. So if you have any comment, feel free to make some. Jim, do you want to say something? Yeah, please go ahead.
Question I was about to ask Daniel, or Mohammed did, is just how we're going to coordinate a response to that liaison statement. And will that be discussed on the mailing list, or is this something the working group chairs are going to do in coordination with the area director and the ITS/ITU liaison?
So is your question how are we going to proceed, or is it a recommendation that
yeah, it's a question about how to proceed. Is this something that essentially, to use a loose term, is going to be decided by the working group's leadership, or is this something that the working group is going to be involved in either drafting a response or approving the response before it gets sent?
So maybe Eric wants to respond on that.
Yes, indeed. And thank you, Jim. Indeed, that's a good question. And the working group will reply. So it will be, I mean, we will not spend hours and hours on this, but the point is that the working group itself will reply. Of course, the letter or the email will be written by the chair, but
Yeah,
it will be, content will be based on the working group.
Yeah, we will just be the pipe. So I mean, the idea is that if you want to make comments, please provide those comments on the mailing list, and we will also make it clear that this has been discussed internally. Sean? Oh,
Hi.
we don't hear you. Oh,
Hi,
yeah.
can you hear me now? Oh,
Yeah.
They often do this where they'll lob liaisons over at us and ask a working group to review their output. It's up to you to decide how much in-depth review you want to provide, either individuals, the working group. So, approach at, as you see fit. But I think the going up and using the existing channels and making sure that it all gets answered in a timely fashion is important. You can literally just thank them for their output document and be done with it. You don't have to technically enter into any kind of back and forth with them, but it's up to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I haven't had time to go through the document, I must say, yet. But I hope it's not too orthogonal to what we're doing. Okay, so let's start. Eric, you want to say something? Otherwise, Stu, please take the floor is yours.
Actually, I thought that the architecture update was coming from Shuai.
Oh, okay, right. I took the first. So Shuai, yeah. Go ahead.
So this is updated for the architecture draft. First one.
I can hardly hear you.
Can you still hear me though?
I mean, at least me, I have problem hearing you.
He's very quiet.
Better? How about now?
It looks you're not speaking to your mic.
All right, should I leave?
Now to me, it sounds completely quiet.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. How about now?
Yeah, that's better to me.
Okay, all right. I'm just take off my speaker. So I want to say thanks to for making the good effort already. Hopefully we can make this out together on time. Next slide, please. So we're sending out the 05 version, just trying to address the previous issues from the, I would say, 10 reviewers already. We have a GitHub to list all the issues, which is not shared to the other person except the author yet. So we also trying to itemize the issues we trying to improve at the end of the presentation. Just to keep in mind that we have not addressed all the comments yet. I will specify what comment has been addressed in a following slide, but we haven't got the time. And I would say the first thing we wanted to try to organize the context a little bit based on the comment, and we needed to figure out what goes where and what really needed in this draft. Once we figure that out, so the rest is just filling out the details. Hopefully, under the working group last call, we can get a solution on that. Next slide, please. So the reason I put this obvious slide here is just to remind people who are not familiar with the drip drafts. I call it the drip architecture draft a drip ecosystem. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is my understanding. So I think the drip architecture driver should describe drip ecosystems, including which is called remote ID design, emphasize on why we use HID and instead of how. So the details, of course, going to go to the specific draft. Then we also refer to the requirement itself, and there's also some of the comments from the previous already. And the architecture should also explain the relationships among all the drip entities, such as UAV, ground control station, operator, registry, and security trustworthy, all these entities. And the current ARC draft doesn't including all of them. So, and Stu has already shared offline a list of the entities, which is we needed to, I think we needed to cherry pick and discuss and hash out all the details, what should be included in this architecture. So as far as I can tell from the list, we have most entities covered in solution draft, in separate draft. We just need to explain how it's going to be used and the relationship between different entities in the architecture draft. I think that's the most of the comment, and some of the comments from previous is kind of overlapping, but that's the main concerns to explain the connections between each of entities. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. You can skip this one. Just basically summarize what I had said from last slide. So you can skip this one. Okay. So this is one of the summary we have tried to address on the new version. Some of the comments are the same from others, such as lack of a broadcast read introduction. So we added section 1.2.2, which is borrowed from the requirement document. I think one of the comments from Daniel, from you, is actually trying to make sure the architecture draft is self-contained. So that's one of the things we are taking actions on it. And we also added section 3 to explain all the acronyms. That's the Michael's comment. There's too many TLAs and it's hard to understand. So we try to edit as much as we can on the section 3. So there's a new section on section 4, HHIT for US ID. I expect the most in this section will resolve lots of existing comments, such as like why HHIT is a perfect design. I'll call it a perfect design for a read, and what's the problem it will solve. So its current format, we put lots of notes in there because Michael has comment. I think it's a great comment to list the issues. We are trying to address this issue in this section. And also the comments regarding informative language usage, we will be gradually fix it once we put all the details in there. So that shouldn't be a big deal. Next slide, please. So more comments regarding the hybrid remote ID subsection. We removed that, and I've discussed with Bob. I think that's not a big useful anymore. Hopefully, everybody agrees with that. Again, we added the broadcast ID figure, and we will put more explanations from the comments regarding how a broadcast ID would be used without networking or with networking. We also planning to address the safety and security issues. I would assume going to be in section 10, security considerations. But I think there are 3 people comment on that, Carson and Amelia. I think that we need to make distinction, right? What is safety and security in the architecture draft? Okay. Next slide, please. So this is this slide lists the things, at least I think we need to focus on for next 1 or 2 revisions. So most of the existing comments maybe is solved. We fill out all the details in the list items. For the others, like Alex and I think his comment, I haven't got enough time to look at it, but his comment is more regarding why HHIT is not perfect. I mean, it's perfect. I mean, so we need to explain that in section 4. Also, as I already mentioned, that we have done in section 1, the detailed section 1.4, which is the DRIP architecture overview, and that still needs some work to explain DRIP ecosystems plus STU's of a list of the entities. We probably needed to put some of the entities there, trying to make connections. Then section 5, comments regarding adding a DS registry section. I think this is a great comment. Then we can use that section to explain why read should be using reverse DS lookup. And I think that's one of your comment, Daniel. And also Stu also, I mean, as I mentioned, Stu stressed a list of the entities that will be also explained in section 5. Currently, there are only 2 or 3. I think a produce source and registry is in there, but the other is not. I think it's important we explain what all the entities are. Then in section 6 is more about how USID can be used in the real world or solve practical problems. Things like HHIT naming collisions. That's one of the comments we need to explain. And why HHIT has better encryption than the others, like X509. I think that's my last slide. That's a summary I have done, and the things my things we needed to improve with this draft. So, any comments? I think this goes faster than I expected, but that's all I want to say.
Okay, good. Thank you. Do we have any comments or from the audience? So when do you expect the next version, or do you?
Well, I'm guessing in 1 or 2 weeks we should have a new version to get the architecture we want, the structure we wanted. Right? At least 1 or 2 weeks. I think we need to hash out the details. All right. I mean, I only took it over like 2 or 3 weeks, so I need to understand the other draft to understand what. I mean, I think the first in this meeting we need to understand if because I keep saying the DRIP ecosystem when we're talking about the architecture. Is this the same concept that you guys have or the working group has? Like, it is the architecture's job to explain the ecosystem inside the group, not outside the group, right? Whatever we have currently in our working group repository. So I think that's the things we need to agree on, because previous comment is to keep explaining that DRIP architecture. I mean, we don't have architecture, but In my mind, we do have architecture, but should be focusing inside the group. That's my understanding. So I think we need to hash out the architecture, the structure first in 1 or 2 weeks. Then the rest will be filling details, and I think everybody can chip in for that.
Okay.
The original deadline milestone we had should work out, but considering it's holiday season on December, and also there's Thanksgivings, but expect some delays as well.
Okay, right. So I expect the next version people should commit to get some reviews.
Right. I would let people wait for next revision because we have so many notes in there. Just wait out a little bit, and then we will call out to people. Then things are ready for deep reviews.
Okay, great. Andre?
Just getting ready for next presentation. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you just repeat what you said?
No, I'm just getting ready for my presentation, testing if video works and stuff.
Okay. Okay, good. So let's move on to the next presentation.
All right.
Thank you very much, Shai.
Okay, so my name is Andre Gurtov from Linköping University, Sweden, and I'm going to describe process of making open source implementation of DRIP. Next slide, please. So it's a joint effort by 9 students and me in the course in the university. And we have 2 components to develop. So first, OpenHIP, open source version, which have been updating for a few years. And the new crypto protocols that Bob is submitting in that draft. And we also took open source OpenDroneID as a starting point for develop Observer app and also the broadcast ID. Next slide, please. So for HIP, we need to update that code because it's used in at least part of solutions in DRIP. So first, we needed to make better signature algorithm for signing messages. So Edward digital signature algorithm. Then the structure of new ORCIDs, which describe how the host identity tag is made. And finally, the introducing hierarchy into the hits, so that, for example, it's not like plain text 128-bit string, but it's also includes some data like who issued this HIT. Next one. So this ORCID actually now is a little bit outdated because it describes the first version of remote ID draft, but as you see, the traditional ORCID, we had the reserved prefix, and for new ORCID where we have hierarchy, we need like a special hash function called CShake, variable output, and it also includes the ID of organization that issued it, so it's a new change. Next one. So for new crypto, we have currently implemented Kiak cipher because it's lightweight and more efficient than IES, but it has not been selected for next NIST route, so maybe we are switching to Hudiak. Also, key generation function based on it, and Edwards curve digital signature algorithm that I already mentioned for efficient small signatures. Next. So to test all this, we are using the open source core network emulator that we also have updated to include latest version of Python test suite so that we can check that all the new features are working and the base exchange works and in general code is operational. Next, please. So in this picture, for example, you can see the HIP version 2 base exchange completing with new crypto, Kiak cipher. So this is like prerequisite to have this feature when we start adding trust into the remote ID or provide transport for network ID. Next, please. So for the DRIP implementation, we want to start with implementation of broadcast drone ID using Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, where we just send this host identity tag in hierarchical way. And for development platform, it's a Raspberry Pi 3 or 4 with GPS receiver, very limited space, something like 20 bytes to include into the broadcast messages, and to develop an Android application that people can see which are drones are flying nearby and maybe in future use as a gateway for network ID. And we started with this US redraft 01, which explains why our ORCID version is a bit outdated now. Next one. So for Android application, for OpenDroneID, it supported only Bluetooth so far, but we wanted to try Wi-Fi first because we didn't have like Bluetooth dongle, and we took this Wi-Fi analyzer as like open source application to start with. And it proved to be a bit challenging because actually to get some data from a drone, you need to connect to it as an access point, and then like try to figure out what is it broadcasting. So it's as next slide will show, it's a bit tricky in practice. Next slide. Currently we are reading these SSIDs of Wi-Fi drones and try to identify them this way. In future, maybe using Wi-Fi neighborhood aware networking mode will be like more practical, because in current mode you basically need to root your Android device, and it's not corresponding to the model when a user just installs something from Play Store and see the drone. So it's but on the other hand, this NAN mode, it requires hardware support from Wi-Fi chip and also maybe updating the Android version. So maybe it's also a bit challenging at least in the short term. Next slide. So in this slide, you can see a prototype of Wi-Fi listening and displaying access points, which are like flying drones in this our current prototype. But since it's kind of hard and to implement without routing, so maybe Wi-Fi is not the best option for using this broadcast remote ID. And that maybe explains also why OpenDroneID and the Adams prototype has not been using it. So now we are switching to Bluetooth because it seems to be easier and does not require this routing problem. Next slide. So currently we started to look at the beacon formats in Bluetooth, and there are different versions. So this is even like Bluetooth low energy, but I think for drones it makes sense to use regular Bluetooth because we need a bigger range, and also it's not so critical on the battery. I mean, drones operate max few hours, so it's not like a sensor that needs to save battery for I don't know, weeks or years. So maybe we'll switch to the standard Bluetooth. Next slide. But so far we found Bluetooth much better and easier to work with than Wi-Fi. So there are already several applications available that we are working to improve on. And with Bluetooth low energy, the range is not that big, around 50 meters, but I think in Adams experiments we reached about 100 meters to Bluetooth 4 and 500 for Bluetooth 5. So we are looking also to achieve this kind of ranges. Slide. So that's basically it. So we are aiming to complete like a full version of remote broadcast ID with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi by end of this year. So now we are working to update the ORCID implementation of HIT to 2.5. Also take Hodiak latest cipher and update to the latest RID 04 implementation. Hopefully we also have time to try on a real flight platform, like attach some Raspberry Pi and GPS to Phantom 4 drone. And in future, I'm already defining for the spring term some thesis topics and projects also for remote ID, and maybe bringing implementing claims and having trust into the HIT. So that's it. Any questions?
Well, thank you. That's very nice to see things flying, I would say. Any comment? Any questions? Hearing none, I think we can move to the next presentation.
So perhaps, Adam, you could take over note-taking for the moment while I present the next few slides. So we've had some activity beyond writing drafts. Is my audio going out clearly?
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great. So ASTM, the overall UAS committee F38 met in the first week of November, but the UAS remote ID working group within F38 did not meet as part of the big plenary meetings because the agreement remains that the F3411 updates will wait until the FAA publishes their final rule. The UAS RID working group did have an interim meeting. They were very friendly to our few small requests, but all mods, not just ours, are in the backlog. ICAO's trust framework people are also accepting our inputs in a very friendly way. They've made some substantial revisions to their documents based upon our inputs. I've mostly been working lately with the people who are doing the use cases. That's the Tron working group, and then that gets turned into identity standards by the DI working group, and then a network by the GRAIN working group. And Bob's been more active in those, but he indicated to me earlier today that that's been a little bit quiet in the last few weeks. We've had a number of interactions with various U.S. agencies, starting with FAA, of course. All the other agencies besides the FAA are waiting to see what the FAA publishes in December, and the FAA claims that they are on track to publish in December. And the rumor is that they're flipping from network remote ID to broadcast remote ID as the baseline, and that would be fairly disruptive to what a lot of people have been assuming. There was a lot of interest in what's variously called Blue Force Tracking, or IFF, which leads to interest in resilience against spoofing, which DRIP provides. In the UTM Pilot Project 2, we showed multi-vendor USS interoperability with key functions, including both forms of remote ID. Range of the broadcast remote ID remains a concern, and the FAA in their NPRM said don't use unmanned aircraft registration numbers as the UAS ID type, and they gave their reasoning for not wanting to do that. But in UPP2, the FAA said do correlation queries into our database, and what you must use as a key is the UA registration number. So the FAA needs to sort some things out internally. And I want to quickly flip through the next 4 slides very quickly. So you've all seen this before. I just wanted you to see what we said to the federal agencies and how we said it, and I don't see any point in drilling into it right now. People can look at this slide later if they want to. Next slide. And we had a lot of slides like this that you've seen before. Now you see the fine print under the red cannot be spoofed. Of course, there is no such thing as a system that can't be spoofed, but we think that to spoof this, you would need to have a little tiny quantum computer. And this was very popular with the federal agencies. And the point is that this is the first thing that we do above and beyond ASTM F3411. Next slide. So this is what it looked like. We did a scenario where we had operators Alice, Bob, and Carol, and we had observers Doug and Eve, and there was a several step scenario, and we showed that if the sender has only baseline ASTM, or if the observer the receiver has only baseline ASTM, then you cannot disambiguate between spoofers and real folks. But if both the sender and the observer's receiver have our trustworthy extensions, then yea, verily, you can disambiguate a spoofer from the real deal. Next slide. Oh, the picture in the middle is Adam's app. Yep. Okay, so it's really nifty. So way forward, registries, big open area. This really needs to be hit hard. We have talked about crowdsourced RID feeding broadcast into network. We need to start prototyping that. And then we need to start leveraging DRIP to enable the things beyond, ID as an end itself, things where ID is instead a means to various ends. And so, making the sender trustworthy, not just the communications trustworthy, but the origin of the communications trustworthy would be an obvious next step. And then we need to start thinking about what happens, on beyond that with intermittently networked autonomous UAS. And I believe that was my last slide. So anyway, a lot of interest from U.S. Federal agencies. I can't say what the Europeans or anybody else may be thinking at this point. We kind of need some champions to, to put this forward to EASA and other CAAs around the world, other regulators, and not just the FAA. Thanks. I'm done.
Okay, so what you said in the beginning was that the broadcast mode is prioritized, or they completely get rid of the network mode?
Okay, so this is all rumor because the FAA rule writers are not allowed to talk to anybody else, even other federal agencies, while they're writing a rule. But the rumor is that they are abandoning the concept of network remote ID. Now, I've gone on record with the federal agencies as saying that's not going to happen, because even if there's no network remote ID by name, there will nonetheless, within the scope of UTM, be functions that are essentially the equivalent of network remote ID.
Okay. Any question? So one last question from me, but does it mean that the drone and a provider will not establish a TLS or IPsec session?
Right. Broadcast remote ID is a link layer phenomenon that is not UDP, but very UDP-like.
Okay. Okay, right. Thank you. Good to know. I suggest we move to the next presentation. Let me try. Which is Adam.
Yes.
And is that the certificate attestation?
Yes. Oh, there it is. There we go. Pardon the cheeky name. I worked, it's 3:10 a.m. for me, so I've been working on this the past couple of days. So my mind turned to mush. So I'm going to just talk about claims, assertions, attestations, and certificates. Oh my. Next slide, please. So small recap. This was, first off, the draft that this is pulling from was rewritten massively. It got switched from XML to Markdown. I've started to call it drift proofs, but that's just kind of me talking out of wherever I'm talking. But Stu started a conversation on the list because he was realizing that there was a lot of people getting confused because we were throwing the term certificate around, we were throwing the term claim around, and then the word attestation started getting thrown around. And he started a email chain in the list to be like, what do we mean by these terms? There were some great responses from Karsten, Michael Richardson, Hank, Bob, and Michael Pelage. But it was clear just from the conversation that we needed to put a stake in the ground and we needed to define these terms, how DRIP was going to use them, and give some examples. So this presentation is kind of me, after reading the emails about 7,000 times, what I saw and how it fits into what DRIP is doing. So this is my proposed way of going forward with it, because it's important. It touches the claims draft, it touches the auth formats draft, it touches the registry draft, which hasn't been written yet, but is going to be, and is the next thing on my list, along with Bob and Michael Pelage, and also the UAS RID draft. Next slide. Okay, so we'll start simple. There's claims and there's assertions. Claims are a predicate consisting of two elements. This comes from a definition I think Stu put into the list. There are some examples there. X owns Y, X is Y, X belongs to Y, and little hints of what it looks like in DRIP. And an assertion is a grouping of one or more claims by a given entity. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a claim. This was something that Bob pointed out in his email. A hierarchical host identity tag is an assertion slash claim. I'd argue it's an assertion. It has a bunch of claims in it, as you can see in the color-coded portion at the bottom. We have a claim of I have a unique identity or a unique hash that points to a key pair, and I have a unique registry that I belong to that's a pairing of a RRA and an RAA and an HDA. You could also extend the claims to be, oh, well, I'm using this prefix and I'm using this OGA ID, and these are the claims that the HIT asserts. But that's all it is. It's just an assertion of I'm in this registry and I have this identity, which is 64 bits of entropy. Next slide, please. So we move to the next piece, attestation and certificate. An attestation is a signed assertion. It can be signed by anybody. In DRIP scenario, it would most likely be signed by the party that owns or claims to own said assertion. So they have the associated private key pair, public-private key pair that the HIT points to, and you sign against it, or anything else that you want, and use the HIT as a key to get in. The minimum is a hierarchical HIT HI pairing, a host identity pairing. You can also use it to bind relationships between different parties using other pieces. The second thing is certificates. So a certificate is, by Stu's definition that I kind of took and I think is a generalization of what Karsten and Hank and Michael were going after, is it is signed by a third party. And that's the critical thing. A certificate is something that a third party is attesting to. And for DRIP, it is mostly identities. We could narrow this further to be a trusted third party, aka the registry, though I think that gets us in a very weird situation where we're saying, oh, it's a trusted third party, but then how do you trust it? I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So it's a thought, but I don't think we need to go there unless the working group thinks we do. Next slide, please. So this is, I'm sorry if it's small. The slides are available so you can blow this up to see it a little bit better. These are the examples of attestations and certificates, the structures that are defined in the identity claims draft. So a typical attestation is a hierarchical host identity tag, its corresponding host identity, a expiration timestamp, signing timestamp, and the 64-byte signature. That's at the max. The minimum would be the hierarchical host identity tag, an expiration timestamp, and a signature. Certificates embed these attestations. So CXX and CYY in these examples is wrong. It should be AXX and AYY, because it would use the things on the left in those place marks, and a third party would sign against those to assert and to attest to the entities owning it. with timestamps and expiration timestamps. And there's varying forms of this, making it shorter, changing the fields, removing fields, etc. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed flow in DRIP using the provisioning process as a guide. So the registry, the aircraft, and the operator would create attestations on themselves. I'm going to be rude and say these are R, A, and O. But it's ARR, AAA, and AOO. The operator creates a certificate for the relationship between itself and an aircraft. This would be COA, so the term doesn't actually change, it's still a certificate. And the registry would use AOO to create a certificate between itself and the operator with CRO. And the registry would at least use COA, the certificate on the certificate operator on aircraft, to create CROA, and what we've been calling CRA for a long time now, which Bob is now starting to call the offline attestation / certificate. And this actually changes a little bit. So let's go to the next slide. So we had a discussion, me and Bob, because Bob realized that there was a timing attack, or there was a replay attack on the certificate that we were actually using and that we've been demonstrating for the past couple months. And that is that it can just be replayed. And this is his proposed fix to it. I see where he's coming from. I think it's a good idea. So the top portion is created by the registry. It uses COA to glean the pieces and create this attestation structure of the identity of the registry, the identity of the aircraft, the HI of the aircraft, and a timing, an expiration timestamp over being signed over to be like the registry approves that this aircraft uses this ID and this HI to do whatever it's doing. And then live on the aircraft with every authentication message being sent, which is a cert message, well, what we call a cert message right now, the aircraft would add in another timestamp, a signing timestamp, a current or expiration timestamp, and another 64 bytes worth of signature, which is created by signing the entire upper structure and the 4-byte new timestamp. The question, can you go back, Daniel? Sorry. So I believe that the upper portion will be defined in the identity claims. It might get defined in the registry draft that has yet been written. I do not know. For now, it'll be in the identity claims draft. The lower portion is going to be defined in the auth formats draft. I know that for certain. So that we have to make some amendments there. I have an open question. Is this a certificate or an attestation? The whole structure. I know that upper bit is an attestation, definitely, because it fits with the definition, but what's the whole thing? Is the whole thing a certificate, or is it an attestation because it's the aircraft signing? I'm not sure, so I think it's an attestation, and I think Bob is right in saying it's an attestation as well. But I'd like some feedback on the work from the working group on this, because I'm not 100% sure what bin it falls under. It doesn't matter to me. It's just the text of what I use. Next slide, Daniel. Okay, so what needs to change? So in the identity claims draft specifically, what needs to change is section 1.1. 1.1 is where currently I defined all 4 terms. I need to make sure that they line up with what I've just discussed here and with examples as needed. I need to change all the terms around to say change certificate to attestation where it needs to, and attestation to certificate where it needs to, and change some of these short names or friendly names to some of the structures. I believe the offline form is a good name. It might just be called offline attestation to match with what Bob was going with. And I need to fix the provisioning section so that all the naming conventions flow through the whole document. Next slide. So other to-dos. This is kind of overarching for me, so that the working group kind of knows where I'm going with a lot of the work I'm doing. So first off is the authentication formats draft. Obviously, I need to update that. If I update the identity claims, I need to update the structures there to make sure that everything aligns and isn't being fragmented. I need to start working on a registry draft with Bob. We've been discussing this. I'm getting in touch with Michael Pelage. Me and Bob and Michael will be sitting down hopefully in a week or two to discuss some things. I have to continue the AX implementation, which is still unfortunately closed source. I'm working on that. Fingers crossed. I still haven't switched to the newer auth style. It's still on the old auth style. It got frozen due to the many demos that Stu actually briefed. I didn't want to change anything too suddenly and make things explode in front of a customer's face. Next slide. I think that's it. Yeah, that is it. So here's a nice little XKCD comic, which is becoming a growing trend with me. Any questions, comments, or concerns, either raise them on the list, bring them here. I'd be more than happy to answer anything I need to.
Jonathan?
Hiya, could you go to slide 4, please?
Four. Yes. I had a feeling you were going to go here.
So in claim 1, you say entity owns unique ID.
Yes. Yeah.
Unique.
I'm not quite sure what the
uniqueness
term.
can't be claimed. Or sorry, uniqueness can be claimed. Uniqueness can't be proven. So it seems a
Right,
strange
so-
thing to define.
So I think this ties into a little bit what the registry does, because the registry would get an H hit and then check in the listing of H hits that are available of, oh, is this unique within my scope, the HDA scope? And then the sign and the certificate come in to claim, this is a unique ID. So the wording, I agree with you, is wrong here. That's not the right term. I don't remember exactly what I was going for. Thank you for pointing that out. It comes down to the dance with the registry. The UA creates a hierarchical hit for itself. It creates a key pair, and then it hashes it, and then creates the hierarchical hit, and then it asks the registry, the HDA, I have this new 128 byte thing. Can I use this to be who I am? Can I use this as my name, as my identifier? And the registry gets the final say of saying, no, someone's already taken that, that's already in my list, or yeah, that's yours now. Here's a certificate claiming, or an attestation, whatever the term we use, to say, yep, this is yours, you can have it. So wording needs to be worked out. Thank you for pointing that out. I'd be happy to get some wording from you if you have an idea of what needs to be there for the wording.
I'll see what I can do. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Any other question, comment? Med?
To move to the next slot because we are running out of time. So Bob can jump in.
Thanks, everyone.
Hello. Hope I'm coming through.
I hope so too.
Yep. Okay. Because it's just reloaded. Okay, I'm going to have to go fast here. So let's go on the next slide. And this draft has been around for a while. This is from the DRIP charter. Why we're doing this, let's go on. Privacy to whom, and that is to the observer. Whether they should know or not know, let's go on. The problem statement is that in the standard messages, there is UAS operator PAI. And something needs to be done about that to meet PAI regulations. Go on. Who should have access to PAI? The USS for the UA, authorized entities, whom and so forth, others. But we do need to protect it. We do need to encrypt that PAI that's coming with the broadcast. Go on. So how to encrypt the PI? The U.S. should have business relation with some USS. In fact, that's basic requirement. Thus, they can establish a symmetric key for encrypting the PI with authorized entities able to ask the USS for either the PI directly or for the key for ongoing real-time access to the information. And so go on. So let's go next slide here. So the symmetric cipher must encrypt without expanding clear text. That's hard. No bytes to spare. It would encrypt multiple messages, the operator ID message, operator location, in multiple system messages. Obviously, that operator can move a foot and all of a sudden their location changes. So be able to do this in the high constraints. I think Michael St. John's are pointing me to a solution. Going on. Michael St. John's is very simple. ASCFB with a small with whatever your block is. In this case, CFB 32 with the hidden IV, and the symmetric key derived by a hybrid ECIS scheme handled by when the operation is registered. And key derivation function is now included in this last draft using KMAC. So this is using, in many ways, standard components. ASCFB 32 is well defined, and how to handle the IV and the rest of it. The key derivation, yes, I am using KMAC, but again, this is all standard pieces. Going on. I said this, the cipher feedback allows for variable length block sizes like 32 bits. I chose 32 bits because that's a size that fits with the fields. And smaller size might lead to crypto attack against small location changes. The unique ID is not needed for each application of CFB. So again, it's just a good cryptographic fit. I did get a couple of bruises on the CFRG list coming to this conclusion. Now, when to encrypt? Behind this, the PI must be conditional, only when allowed by the USS, only when the UAS has connection to the USS, and otherwise, if you have, let's do the encryption. But there are limitations to this, and that must be put into the protocol and the recognition. All that is, text is in the draft. Continue. I did look at alternatives to CFB. There's a FISO scheme. It's slow but pretty neat. Problem with ASCTR is we needed 2 bytes in the message for a counter, and there's no 2 bytes available. And I've spent quite a bit of time in the CFRG list on this. There might be an alternative coming from the NIST lightweight crypto, but that's not for another year yet. So that's why I'm staying with CFB 32 for now. Continue. So again, requirements met is privacy 1 and 2, confidential handling and encrypted transport. Continue. And read the draft. It's been out there, and I like this to be adopted by the work group for this. This is currently the only PI in the ASTM messages that may change with the final rulemaking and changes to it. For instance, the operator location does not save the operator's elevation. Is that the guy on the 3rd floor balcony or the 4th floor balcony? But that's easily handled because that would just be handling 8 bytes in and works in this model. So I would like to see this adopted. So let's go. I'm out of time. And so I'll take questions offline. I'll think Jonathan's up there.
Okay, Jonathan.
I'm just a hangover from the last queue.
Okay. Okay, so are we done now?
That's it. That's all I have.
Okay, we don't have very much time for questions. So, because I am tempted to adjourn that meeting, unless we have a last-minute question, last-minute comment. In any case, please provide your comment questions on the mailing list. and we will plan some interim meetings. Thank you, everyone, and see you at the plenary.